Okay. Hello and welcome to the Parsha class. Parshiot Acharei Kedoshim 5783. Today's Parsha class is generously sponsored by Liz Thompson. Should go, this learning of Torah should be a zchut for her and for us. And we should only continue to hear good news together. Quick summary of the Parshiot. They are both relatively short, but together they make up a very large bulk of Jewish philosophy and Jewish ethics. The beginning of Acharei talks about the rules of the Kohen Gadol, the process, the procedure that he goes through on Yom Kippur, with the scapegoat and the goat that's sacrificed, and the different clothing that he wears, and the Torah sort of segues into the different prohibited relationships, those that are have the punishment of karet, of excision, spiritual karet, whatever that is, and obviously one's father, one's mother, one's father's wife, one's sister. All these people are prohibited for relationships, and the Torah goes into some detail about that. That Parsha Acharei concludes with the prohibition against worshiping Molech, and then other kinds of sexual behaviors that the Torah does not want us to engage in. Then leads right into Kedoshim. Kedoshim begins with the whole idea of being holy, of being kadosh, of living a holy life, which is an important part of Judaism, obviously. It talks about fearing your parents, not worshiping idols, keeping Shabbat, being and there. What's really interesting, I heard just I think Rabbi Blumenzweig points out that it's very interesting how the Torah sort of intersperses in Kedoshim laws between man and man, so laws about charity, about payah, and the different agricultural laws that have to do with taking care of the poor. It's interspersed with laws that are more, let's call it ritual, or between man and God. And the point being that these aren't separate things. These are supposed to sort of be included in a normal Jewish life, where you have a sort of kind of holiness in how you relate to God, but also a kind of holiness that you're trying to create in the environment around you, in your community. So different important processes, the idea of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which we're going to discuss, God willing, in the Parsha class, when we talk about not putting a stumbling block before the blind, not physically, but more of on sort of an advice level. If somebody asks you advice and you trip them up, let's say, not having revenge, not being spiteful, and those sorts of things will actually, God willing, we'll talk about in Shabbat Drasha this week. And we're not going to go into too much detail. There's a lot of mitzvot, a total, in fact, of 13 positive obligations and 38 prohibitions in this week's parsha. Quite a few, and so we'll have quite a bit to talk about. And we can't, in the time we have, we can't talk about each and every one, but we'll hopefully give some idea. We'll put a little crack in our knowledge here of the Parshiot. So with that said, let's go with a deeper dive into the verses themselves and see some of the classic and more modern commentaries and see what they say about this. So let's get right into the Yom Kippur service that's talked about in Acharei. So chapter 16, verse 21 says, V'samach Aaron et shtei yadav. Aaron will lean two of his hands for full force, his full weight. He's going to lean onto al rosh hasair hachai, onto the living goat. V'hitvada alav. In other words, not the one that's been pushed off the cliff or Azazel, whatever that means, which you spoke about in previous years. V'hitvada alav. He has his confession over that goat. that kol avonot b'nei Yisrael, and all the avonot, which is a word for sins, of the b'nei Yisrael, that kol pisheihem, and on all of their pisheihem, which is another word for sins, v'chol chatotam, and on all of their chatotam, which is also a word for sin. So 3 different words for sin, and he's supposed to give a confession about these 3 areas. Let's say these are different kinds of sins, which is exactly what we're going to say shortly. V'natanotam al rosh ha'sayir v'shalach biyad ish iti hamidbara. And he sorry, did I say that's that? This is not the sacrificed goat. This is the goat that will be sent out to be thrown off the cliff. So I apologize. So after he confesses all of these sins onto while he's leaning on his head, then he sends it out with a person that's been chosen for this into the wilderness. So as I was alluding to earlier, we have the important question. We certainly have 3 different kinds of sins being mentioned here. Again, the verse said, one second. Yeah. So the verse said, Kol avonot, kol pishehem, v'kol chatotam. So these are all different kinds of sins, and I'm sure ArtScroll has a translation for these sins, misdemeanors, I don't know, different kinds of words that all mean sin. So we need to actually figure out why what the difference is. Now, before you say what's the matter? It doesn't matter. I don't really know Hebrew all that well. And it doesn't matter to me exactly what kind of sin an avon is versus a chatat versus a pishea or whatever. I don't care. What difference is it? What practical difference does it make? So let me tell you now. It might make a practical difference for you if you're praying. If you're the praying type, if you decide to pick up a siddur and you're reading and you want to know what the siddur means, and you want to understand your own prayers, so maybe you'll understand them and maybe you'll pray with more intent and more concentration and with more meaning. So it's important to perhaps know what these words are. And as we'll see from the Malbim in a moment, these words have a very, very different definition, which will actually change how this verse is understood. So again, what does Aaron do? Let's get back to the verse for a moment, just before we translate these words. What's Aaron doing? Aaron is taking this goat that's going to be sent off the cliff, this quote-unquote scapegoat, and he's leaning his hands onto the head of this goat, and he is with full force, full energy, full, his full weight is being placed on the head of this goat. And as he's doing this, he's confessing all of these 3 different categories of sins: the chatotam, the pisheim, the avonot, actually in reverse order, whatever it is. And then this goat is being sent off with this designated person. Okay. That being said, let's get into the Malbim. Malbim in his commentary on Acharei. So over there he says, Al kol avonot b'nei Yisrael al pishehem v'kol chatotam. He's now going to define these 3 terms. And Kvar, he says, first of all, Kvar already ba'arnu ha'havdil ben avon ben pesha. Already ben chata. I've already in a previous place in the previous commentary, he's already explained the difference between these 3 things. And so then now he's talking about why these 3 things are mentioned in this verse, in this order. And also he's going to talk about why it says kol over and over again, all. So what he says in his other commentary, and this is what I really wanted to show you. For some reason I didn't bring it down here in the source sheet. I apologize. But his definitions of these words is important. So first of all, he says avon. Avon isn't just any other kind of sin. It's the sin where you use your intellect, where you use your knowledge to deny that a particular sin is a sin. He says that here too, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Right. Ulam yitzarvir ma'ava b'ones ubesafik l'mashal shekofer omar she'achalav mutter. Somebody who's like a kofar, a person who's denying the validity of the Torah, and he's saying this chalev, this this forbidden fat, it's allowed. I don't care that it's not allowed. It is allowed. Now it is. I sprinkled some water on it. Now it's kosher. Right? So that's called an avon. So that's blatant. That's very serious. And whether you're doing it by accident or lack of knowledge or whatever it is, you've deemed from your own intellect. You've used your intellect. You've made your own religion, and you've decided that's okay. Now, before you start saying that's crazy, why would somebody do that? Look around the world, and you'll find that that's what people do. I do not want to open up this can of worms, but I know it's a very touchy subject. But I was having a discussion recently with somebody about abortion, right? And so this person was saying that I agree. This is not the Torah's view, by the way. This person was saying that I agree that after a certain amount of weeks, it's already a living thing, and it should not be the fetus should not be killed. But up until that point, it's not viable, whatever. Okay, so what did this person just do? I believe. Who made you the defining authority on what's viable for a fetus? What science exactly did you use to say 15 weeks instead of 16 weeks? What's whose authority are you using? So in Judaism, we use the Torah's authority, and we make decisions based on that. We don't make up our own philosophies, and that's exactly what an avon is, or somebody uses their own philosophy, their own possibly subjective, and I would say obviously subjective, ideas about things based on what you saw on Facebook or, I don't know, YouTube, and then you come up with your own ideas, and so then you apply those ideas to other things, and you decide, oh, that's kosher now, I've decided. And so that's a big problem. That's a common thing, especially a growing, I think, a growing problem in the Jewish world, it seems to me. But I don't want to go rant on that right now. A pesha is a different kind of sin. A pesha specifically is a rebellious sin. In other words, that you're making a mistake. You've not intellectualized it. You've not philosophized that this is the right thing to do. I've decided, I have deemed this kosher. You have not done that. That's an avon, right? In a pesha, what you're doing is you know it's forbidden, and you're doing it knowing that it's wrong. In other words, you know it's the wrong thing to do. You're going to do it anyway without any justification. You're not even trying to justify. You don't. And this is a different level, because it's almost like this person doesn't care. It's a sort of apathy, right? It doesn't really matter to me that this is not a kosher thing to eat. I'll eat it anyway. I know it's not kosher. So that's a different level. At least in a way, this is in some ways better, because at least you're not covering your mistake with a philosophy. You're just doing it because you want to, and you know it. So that's called a pesha. And the last one is called a chet. And if we have to sin in any way, this is probably the best way to sin. And this is a sin that's done by accident, sort of, because you don't want to sin, but you have a yetzer hara, like all of us do, and it's enticed you to do this wrong thing. And there's no philosophy, not apathy, just a weakening of your will. So there's a completely different kind of level. So the worst kind of sin, really, let's go in order here. The worst kind of sin is an avon, where you've wrapped a philosophy around your sin. So the next level down, easier to do teshuva, is where you're just apathetic. You just don't care. Maybe it's not easier. I don't know. Maybe different for different people. And the lowest level of sin is where you know it's wrong. You're not apathetic. You're trying not to do it, but then you've become seduced by your yetzer hara, and you've ended up doing something wrong. So the easiest metaphor for all of these is, of course, let's say tray food. And usually, by the way, when we talk about tray food, it's really a metaphor for sexual things. But let's talk about tray food anyway, just to keep things more kosher, right? So you decide you want to have this burger, right? And it's from a non-kosher restaurant. So you can create a philosophy that says, oh, it's okay. It's basically, it's how do I know that it's not a kosher meat? How do I know it wasn't shechted? Maybe it was shechted. You come up with a whole excuse. You can write a whole essay about why this is a kosher burger, and then you're going to eat it. So that's called what? That's called an avon. The next level is you're passing by this restaurant, and it's not kosher, and you're supposed to keep kosher, but you like the taste. You're not even fighting your yetzer hara. It's not even itching you. You just say, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter that H-Shem said not to eat it. I'm going to eat it anyway. Right? So that's called a pesha. And then the last level is you're walking by a non-kosher restaurant. You don't want to go in there, but the wafting aroma of the burger makes it so delicious. It makes you salivate, and you can't fight your yetzer hara anymore. And you just rush in there, and regretfully you buy this thing and you eat it, and you're crying and you're sad about doing it. That's called a chet. That's the lowest level of teshuvah. So that's the lowest level of sin that we're talking about in this verse. And of course, what we're talking about again is that when Aaron, is doing this vidu, is doing this confession of the sins of the Jewish people, he's talking about all three levels. He wants Hashem to forgive the Jewish people for all of that. What's really amazing, what people aren't thinking about is that is what he's being forgiven for. Every single Jewish person in the world. When that string turns from red to white, the Jewish people are forgiven. They're forgiven for all three of those things, for all of it. For the people who have these crazy philosophies that they've invented to do whatever they want to do, and for people who don't care and are doing it anyway and are going to do it regardless of what color the string turns, as long as they themselves are still alive, they're going to keep on sinning because they don't care. They have apathy, right? So those people are also being forgiven, and the people who sin and sin by the force of their yetzer hara, they're also being forgiven. All three forgiven, and that's the beauty of Yom Kippur service when there was a Beit Hamikdash, and of course that still exists today, and perhaps even on the same level. I'm not going to say it's not. It's not my place to say, but that's sort of the idea. All right, let's keep going. Now that we're talking about Yom Kippur, it's an interesting point to bring up that Yom Kippur is not just any old day of the year. It's on a specific day of the year, as we see in the verse. The verse says, chapter 16, verse 29. This should be, now that after giving the whole list of everything that's supposed to go on during the Yom Kippur service and the sacrifice, then it says, this is going to be for you forever. On the 7th month, which is right in Tishrei, be'eser lachodesh, on the 10th day of that month, ta'anu et nafshetechem, you should have ta'anit, you should fast, right? You should torture your souls, I guess is the best translation I can think of. V'chol malacha lo ta'asu, don't do any work. You're not allowed to work on Yom Kippur. You're not allowed to drive, carry, right? Be'ezrach v'hager hagar betochachem. This goes for you and for even the person who lives amongst you, amongst the Jewish people at this time. So that's forever. So the question it becomes, as I referenced before, why does this have to happen then? Why is Yom Kippur on the day that it is? Let's look at Rav Zalman Sorotskin's Znaim LaTorah. He brings up this question. He quotes a Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer. That's one of the old midrashim. Natan Tam. He says that the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer gives the reason why this is when it is. Why is the day of forgiveness on Yom Kippur specifically? Who said that Yom Kippur should be the day of forgiveness? Lama Nikava Yom Ha'asiri Lachet Hashvi Yom Slicha v'Kapara. Why is Yom Chodesh Hashvi? Why is the 10th day of the 7th month the day of forgiveness and atonement? Hainu shemosha alo l'har Sinai lekabelet luchot habet b'Rosh Chodesh Elul. So on Rosh Chodesh Elul, on the first day of the month of Elul, is when Moshe Rabbeinu went to Har Sinai to get the second pair of luchot. Remember, he destroyed the first pair after when he saw the golden calf back on the 17th of Tammuz. Then he asked for forgiveness, and he was granted forgiveness. He went to Har Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. Then he was granted forgiveness. He came back down. Then he went to Har Sinai again for 40 days and 40 nights to get the second luchot. That time that he went up to get those second luchot, that was Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? Shah Sham Mem Yom, and he was up there for 40 days. Now, what's 40 days after the first of Elul? So it's the whole month of Elul, which is 30 days, and then 10 days. So that ends up being the 10th day of the month of Tishrei. Moshe came down with the second luchot on Yom Kippur. So that's why Yom Kippur is the day for kapara, because that's what happened to the Jewish people way back when. Moshe started the cycle, right? Moshe was the first, before the Kohanim took over the ceremony, as in this week's parsha, before they were given the job of everything they needed to do on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur was H-Shem granting atonement and forgiveness to the Jewish people through Moshe, who was up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, which ended on Yom Kippur. He came down on the 10th of Tishrei. She'az nitratza lo hamakom umachal Yisrael at Avon v'Egel. That's when they were forgiven for the sin of the golden calf. Let's not focus too much on the word Avon here. And that's why that day is the best day for the forgiveness of the Jewish people for generations, forever and ever. That's when they were forgiven the first time, back then, after the golden calf, and that's why they'll be forgiven also for generations on that same day. He continues, just in case that wasn't solidified yet in your head. He says, "Ve'efsha perhaps lehosif, shelefichach anu marbim lomar yud gimel midot b'yom haKippurim." That's why maybe that's why we say the 13 characteristics of Hashem on Yom Kippur so often. But Seret Yimei Teshuvah, and on the days of the 10 days of Teshuvah between Yom Kippur, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have Slichot, where we say over and over again the 13 midot of Hashem, assuming we have a minyan. And the reason for that is because that's what Shikain Asa Moshe B'Yamim. That's what Moshe did on those days. That's when he got those 13 midot, as it says in the Torah. And he quotes the place in Shemot, Lamed Gimel. All right. So then he quotes the Midrash. The point is that the whole idea, why do we have Yom Kippur when we have it? It's not just a random day. Now, of course, we'd have it either way, even if we didn't understand why, because it says so in the Torah. But why do we celebrate it the way we do, with the mourning and the fasting and the Yud Gimel Midot? It's because that's when the Jewish people were forgiven for the sin of the golden calf. It's not a coincidence. All right, now we're going to, if you don't mind, we're going to skip right into Kedoshim. So we spent about half the class talking about Acharei. Let's talk about the next parsha. There is a lot to say on Kedoshim. So much that really, there's some parsha where I'm like, I struggle and try to figure out what should I say? You know, what new thing can I add to previous classes? The parsha Kedoshim, I have no problem. I can talk about Kedoshim the entire year. I could spend talking about parsha Kedoshim with the material that's available. Baruch Hashem. So starts with Daber. Moshe is told by Hashem, Daber El Ben Kol Adat Bnei Yisrael, speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel, Marta Alehem, and say to them, Kedoshim Tiyu, be Kedoshim, be holy. Now, before reading the next few words, right? Be holy, and then the next word is going to be key. Be holy because. So, what would you expect to happen at that point, without reading what it says? I'll cover it up so you don't see it. So, well, what would you expect for Hashem to be telling Moshe at this point? Be holy because it's better for you. You'll enjoy your life more because that's what you were created for. There's all kinds of possible reasons why you should be holy. But Hashem says a different thing. Why should you be holy? Tell them to be holy. Why? Kadosh ani. Because I am holy. Hashem Elokeichem. I'm Hashem, their God. This is a little bit strange. Be holy because I'm holy? Wait, are we expected to be as holy as Hashem? That's impossible. That's like saying, be kind because I'm kind. Now, he does say that. There is such an idea of acting like Hashem, but nowhere do we expect to be on that same level. And especially here, holiness. Holiness is so, I think the word I'm looking for is like ephemeral. It's such a, like, how do you define it? How do you know you're holy? Or how do you know anything is holy? It's I wouldn't say subjective, but like what does Hashem expect from us exactly? So let's look and see what is told to us by the great Rav Moshe Feinstein in Darash Moshe. He asks this same question too, more or less. Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani nira dehu lahorod she'ein shayich sheyitzava echad et ha'acherim la'asot devarim tovim kishehu be'atzmo eina osa zot. The nature of people is not to listen to people who are telling them to do something if they're not doing it too. In other words, right? You've got somebody who's a bad driver telling you to be a careful driver. Now, I'm trying to stay out of mitzvah for a minute, although it's a mitzvah to drive carefully. I'm not going to get into that now. That's a separate class. All right. So, but anyway, a bad driver is telling you to be a careful driver. What's your response going to be? The natural response is whatever you say, Mr. Expert Driver, right? Or Miss Expert Driver, whatever it is. And so I don't have to listen to you. You're not doing it yourself. So you're being basically a hypocrite almost. You're telling me to be careful if you're not careful yourself. All right? V'lo rak mishum shelo yitkabel ein lo l'tavoa mashahu eina osa. I don't have to do what you're not doing. V'lo dami l'rofa. But this is not similar to a doctor. Doctor Chole Haguf She'af Sheharofe Be'atzma Chole Biza Inu Nizhar B'ma Shemitzave L'Cholim Mikol Makom HaChole Vada Yizaher. This is different than a doctor. So if a doctor is sick, but he's telling you to, or she is telling you to do something that'll be good for you, even though they're not well, you'll still trust them. Why? Because you know that they're an expert in this field, and you trust that they're an expert. Now, this is a hard thing to talk about nowadays with the current political climate, but medical experts are still experts in their field, and we trust them. That is the halacha, by the way. Right. So why would you listen to this doctor if he's sick, but he's telling you to do the same, to do something that's going to make you well? Because again, you trust the doctor's intelligence, his experience, his knowledge base. But the why Hashem is saying that he is holy is to tell you that he's got the knowledge. He's got the experience. He knows, right? Like the doctor knows medicine, lahavdil, Hashem knows holiness. That's his field. Holiness is Hashem's field. I am holy, and I'm telling you, you can be holy. It's not a foreign idea. It's not something that's like so impossible. I don't know if I can ever do this. It'll never work for me. Follow my steps, and it'll work. It has to. Because I'm the expert in this field. I created, Moshe doesn't say this, but the whole idea of Kedusha comes from Hashem. So of course it won't work otherwise. Parush Kadosh Baruch Hu Eino Cholech B'midat Hadin. So L'chein Gam Atem Kedoshim to you, Shehu Prushim to you. Ubelow Zeh Lo Haya Omer Zeh L'Yisrael. So we have to listen to Hashem's advice. Why? Because Hashem is the expert on holiness. And just like a doctor, you listen to his advice, even if he doesn't look like he's well, it doesn't matter. He knows what it takes, and you have to trust his expertise. And that's why Hashem points out that he's holy, so that you'll know that if you follow these lessons, you will indeed be holy, and you'll be forgiven, as was said earlier. Okay. Let's keep going. As I said in the introduction, a quick summary. Much of this parsha is like back and forth, with laws between man and laws between man and God, and they're interspersed. So this particular law is clearly about between man and God, right? It says, chapter 19, verse 4. Al tifnu el elilim, don't go with the false gods. V'elahei masecha, it should not say elokei, that should be a hey. The gods that were made, lo ta'asu lachem, ani Hashem elokechem. Don't make formed gods. Don't form plastic, earthenware, whatever kinds of metal. Don't make gods, because I am Hashem. So the word for these false gods, as we saw, is elilim. Let's talk about what that word means. We're going to look at Rav Samshon Raphael Hirsch. He starts by talking about why the difference in al and lo, which are the same letters, by the way, both mean don't or do not. And there is somewhat of a difference, he says. But let's get into... So, we need to at least mention that the word al, according to him, from the word alal, denotes only the negation of what one wishes or ought to do. So it is never used in conjunction with the past or present tense. It's about the future. Don't do that, right? As opposed to lo, which might be right now, right? So that being the case, the word al, remember this, al means don't do this in the future. He says now, elilim are powers that deny. Because that's what al is. Al means don't. Like the what's that, that sign with the circle and the line across it, right? So that's al, don't, right? Elilim are powers that deny. That's what they mean. This amounts to the heathen conception of God, the non-Jewish idea of God. For the gods are powers that are hostile to man and hinder his success. When a person relies only on himself, he senses everywhere the limits of his own power. He senses that in order to fulfill his aspirations and desires, he is everywhere at war with higher powers, and he must struggle against them or flatter them so that they accede to his requests. This is a common theme throughout Rav Hirsch's writings. We've seen this many times in past classes. The idea is that it's me against the gods in the non-Jewish world, the way Rav Hirsch understands it. This outlook and this need, more than anything else, produces the heathen gods and their cults. Even today, souls that become estranged from Jewish belief arrive as a result at heathen beliefs and practices. Such notions must have no place in your conception of God. Do not direct your thoughts to divine beings that are hostile to man and his aspirations. Do not even consider believing in their existence. Now, whether they exist or not, he seems to be implying, right? Don't think of them. Don't acknowledge them. This whole idea of the man versus the gods, by the way, this is also a theme in literature. A common theme is the God, man versus nature, man versus man, man versus God, right? This idea of man versus God, that's not a Jewish idea. We're not fighting him. We're not trying to appease him. We're trying to fit into his plan. He is everywhere, and he exists completely without us. All our job is to fit in. We're the puzzle piece looking, to fit nicely into the rest of the puzzle. And he continues there. Let's just the last line is very nice. Awareness of God should fill our conscious at all times. It should not be crowded out, even temporarily, by a momentary contemplation of elilim. So we're not supposed to think of these other things to the point where it's pushing God out of our thoughts. Okay. Okay, we have, if I'm not mistaken, two more very important pieces, fundamental to understanding Jewish thought. This next piece has to do with holiness as well, and it's worth this comment is worth its weight in gold, no question. There is a sin, we know, for example, from a few parshiot ago, that there is a sin of eating non-kosher food. There's a punishment for it. The punishment, by the way, is, as for most things in the Torah, lashes. Lashes are not pleasant. Lashes are virtually deadly, but they're physical, and they last for a certain amount of time, and then they're gone. As you'll see soon, there are certain things you can eat that are not kosher, that the punishment for them is much, much more harsh. So, for example, talking about when it comes to eating something that's called nosar, meat of offerings, the punishment is very different. So, in other words, once you bring a sacrifice, you're given a certain amount of time, let's say a day or two, to eat that sacrifice. If you leave it over past that time, it's now 2 or 3 days old, whatever, or 4 days, 1 week old. And let's say you refrigerate it somehow, you keep it under ice. I don't know. You keep it cool and it's still fresh and you want to eat it again. Can you do it? The answer is no. At that point, you should not eat that sacrifice. At that point, you should have had it burnt so that you don't even get tempted to eat it, because it's a very big sin to eat a sacrifice after its expiration date. And it's much more than just eating not kosher. How much more? So chapter 19, verse 8 tells us, so the person who eats this thing has a huge sin against the holiness of Hashem, and he will be, or she will be, nichrita, cut off from the word karet, will be cut off, the soul will be cut out from the people. Wow. That's not lashes. That's karet. Karet is worse than death. It's an eternal, I don't know the right English word. I guess they usually say like damnation, whatever that means. But you're spiritually cut off from your source. You feel empty and ungodly in your spiritual hereafter. It's huge, right? So let's look at why that could be the case. Why is this so much worse than eating, a shtick treif, right? You eat a piece of chazer, you eat a piece of pork, or you eat a rabbit. None of those are going to get you cut off from the Jewish people. This will. What's going on? So the Orach Chaim, classic Orach Chaim, yesh lateit tam, he likes to give a reason to things sometimes. Lama chamur onesh kohen ochel Kedoshim chutz lizmanam. Why is this sin so bad for a Kohen who's eating this offering past its time? Chiyuv karet. It's karet. It's a spiritual excision. Yoter me'ochel nevelo trifaj ushikatzim. It's worse than somebody who eats a non-kosher animal, or an animal that wasn't shechted correctly, or even creepy, crawly insects. All of those don't pale in comparison in terms of punishment to what happens to somebody who eats this particular overdue korban. So here's the answer, and this is where it becomes very, very important and relevant to all of us. Duh, you should know. He says, Ki mehatam atzmo she'amru. The rabbis gave a reason for this. In the Gemara in Yevamot 61a, says there, Yisrael metame be'ohel ve'ein umata olam metamim be'ohel. The corpse of a Jewish person conveys tuma in the tent. In other words, if a person died in a room, anything in that room becomes tame, becomes impure. That's not true for a non-Jew. That's what he says. And by the way, non-Jew there, by the way, just so you know, it's not just any old non-Jew, it's particularly an idolater, right? It's because the Jewish people are very, very holy. And so when the holiness leaves, right? When the Jewish person is holy, and when a person dies, that holiness leaves and leaves a vacuum. And as Rabbi Zev Leff points out, the vacuum is either the tuma itself is the impurity, or because there's a vacuum, now there's room for impurity. Kol haklipot mitkaptzin yachad ubayim alav. Now all the forces of impurity can now converge upon, can go into it. That's the way the Or HaChaim explains. This is the same reason for what we have in front of us. So let me explain all of that so far, so there's some clarity. Tuma, impurity, can only take hold in a place where there was purity, where there was holiness. The holier something is, the bigger the bag. That's right, for metaphor purposes. The bigger the bag. If you had a bag full of gold, all that, if you emptied out that bag full of gold, now it's an empty bag. It's still a big bag. It has now a lot of room for the dirt, right? For the schmutz, for the gross stuff. It's a big bag of the gross stuff now that you've taken out all the good stuff, as opposed to a smaller bag, right? So even if it's a small bag of gold, you take out the little bit of gold, you have a little, a little pocket-sized pouch, right? And you had some gold in it. You took it out. Now it's if you're going to put dirt in it, just a little bit of dirt. It's just pocket-sized amount. So same thing here, right? Same thing is going on here. Since the holy things are very, very holy, there's nothing holier than them. When Hashem tells you that this thing is expired, whether it's a day or two, whatever, that's when its holiness leaves it, leaving that vacuum of where that holiness was, and now that vacuum is able to be filled up with tuma, with impurity. And so what are you doing when you're eating that thing? It's past its expiration date, past the time that its kedusha, its holiness left. You're eating a whole bag of tuma. Mistaleket HaKedusha v'shora alav tuma gdola. Asher koretet nefesh uchalta, and that will cause a soul to be cut off. Masha ein kem betuma tachila sharis, but it's not the same as all other non-kosher foods. Kinivela, treifot, shkatzim, these unshechted animals, or these dead animals, or non-kosher animals, or these bugs, or vermin, or whatever. Those never had that much kedusha. They were just animals to begin with. And so they're, as bad as it is to do that, it's still an avera to do that. It's not as bad of an avera, and therefore you don't get as bad of a punishment, because you have not really so much created this aura of tuma in this thing. Why this is significant, I think, philosophically, is that it gives us a better idea. We still don't completely understand it, I think, but there is a tension in this world between kedusha and tuma, and there, as my Rosh Hashiva point out very often, tuma and kedusha are two different sides of the same coin. They're both very powerful spiritually, powerful in the positive on one side of the coin, and positive and strong in the negative on the other side of the coin. And they can cause different, using them properly or improperly can have a lasting effect on the world. The Nefesh HaChaim points out that even though Hashem is unaffected by anything, our relationship with him is affected by the expressions that we use in this world of Kedusha and Tuma. So in other words, no matter just the metaphor that the Ramchal brings up, and it's worth pointing out here, and I've said this before as well, the Ramchal kind of compares this to sunshine. Nothing you can do can diminish the sunshine. The sun is going to be strong. It's going to be a hot day on Shabbat. Can't do anything about it. It's going to be a scorcher. It's going to be 90 degrees. So what does that mean for you? You know what it means for you? That's Hashem. Metaphorically, that's like Hashem's rays. Hashem's kedusha is that strong. What can you do? You can block it off. You can put a block. You can cover yourself in sunscreen. You can walk around with I don't know if on Shabbat, but you can have you can go outside in your backyard and put a blanket over your head, and you won't feel the sun's rays so much. Not for a few seconds anyway, right? You could sit under a roof. You won't feel as much holiness. Again, using it for the metaphor. But you also have the power to accept more of it, to attract that light, to attract that holiness. And that's what we're trying to do in this world. That's kind of the goal. I'm not saying you should go get a sunburn. I'm saying that there are proper ways to absorb as much kedusha as possible, and through davening, through tefillah, through chesed, to the things it says in this week's parsha. And there are ways to block off that kedusha, as we said at the very beginning of the class, with the pesha, with the avon, with the chet, that people either justify or don't from their lack of care for the kedusha. All right, with all that, I'm not done yet. One last thing I'd like to, if we have time, it's an important concept, and it's worth bringing up. This is one of possibly the most famous verses in the entire book of Vayikra. It's chapter 19, verse 18, 19:18, right? Lo tikom, lo titor, don't be vengeful, don't bear a grudge, at Bnei Yisrael Amecha, against the children of Israel, your nation. And then it says these 5 words, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Hashem. And love your fellow as yourself, I am God. And of course, you've probably heard that there's a saying that is the essence of the entire Torah, and the rest of the Torah is just repetition. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellow as yourself. Where have you heard that from? You might have heard it from all kinds of sources, but the real source to all that is a story in the Gemara in Shabbat 31a, where there's several stories about Hillel and Shammai and different people who either tried to annoy them or tried to convert through them. And so this is the famous story. I'm going to read it to you. This is the actual source of that story. It's going to be relevant to this discussion we're about to have. Shuv Masel Begoy Echad. There's one person, Shabal Ifnei Shammai, came to Shammai. Amar Lo, he said to him, Geirani al Manat Shalamdeni Kol HaTorah Kula Kishani Omed al Regal Achat. I will convert if you can convince me, summarize the entire Torah while I stand on one foot. And he chased him away with a measuring stick in his hand. Shammai's like, what? You want a Reader's Digest version of the Torah? You want me to summarize all the 613 mitzvot and all of the story of creation and everything, all in just one phrase while you're standing on one foot? Get out of here, you joker. So what did he do? Hillel. So he went to Hillel. Hillel is the opposite of Shammai. He says, Gairi Amarlo. So he says the whole thing. Tell me the whole Torah. Well, I stand on one foot. Dalach snei lechavercha lo taver zuhi kol haTorah kula. Whatever you don't like, don't do to your fellow. And that is the entire Torah, B'idach Perushahu, and the rest of it is commentary. Zil Gamor, go and learn it. So yeah, you can summarize the entire Torah. The entire Torah is Dalach Snei L'chavercha Lo Taver. Don't do what's hateful to your fellow, and that is the essence of V'ahavta L'reacha Kamocha, and that's why we bring it up here. Ask the Kli Yakar. Brings a story. Amar Razal Kikola Gadol. The Torah is the big essential essence of the Torah, as it says in the Gemara and Shabbat that we just quoted. Maaseh behillel ba'hu ger shamar lamdeini kol haTorah k'shani omer al regel acha lamdeinu v'lamdu hillel pasuk v'hafta l'recha kamocha. It doesn't actually do, by the way. Rashi explains that that's what he was saying. That idea of what's hateful to your fellow, don't do unto yourself. That's the essence of v'hafta l'recha kamocha. But right, kol dalach snei l'chavercha lo tamid lo tavi. Don't do what's hateful to your fellow. What's hateful to you, don't do to your fellow. V'ida perusha zil gemur. So for the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Pe'anira. So Shammai chased him out thinking he was a joker. Says the Kli Yakar, Pe'anira she'ager haya ger tzedek. No, he wasn't a joker. He was being sincere. And he went and he did what Hillel said. He wasn't joking around. V'lo haya mehata tolim lomar b'derech tzchok she'amdenu kol haTorah ba'od shehu amad al regel achad mamash. He wasn't trying to joke around and say, tell me the whole Torah while I'm standing on a foot as a joke. He was being serious. So what was he trying to do? Why did he want to hear the entire summary of the Torah in one sentence? Elavadai bikesh mamesh sheyamid lo kol mitzvot Torah al yisod echad. I want to know the main. I know that there's a lot of mitzvah. I know there's a lot of Torah. There's a sea of Torah. All these books behind me. There's more being published there every day and every moment. Right? There's a lot of Torah. So he knew that. The Ger knew that. So the question that he was asking while he stood on one foot is I know that there's a lot to the Torah. What I want to know is I want to know the yisod. I want to know the foundation of it all. Kedei shelo yavo lidei shechicha mitzia beger asher lo lamad v'nurim klum b'mitzvot haTorah. So I am a ger. I am a convert, he's saying to Hillel. I can't learn the entire Torah. I don't have time to learn the entire Torah. Give me one principle that I'm going to be able to learn, and that principle is going to keep me Jewish throughout my Torah education. I'll keep learning. You're right. That's what he says. Right? He says that's the principle. And now that you know the principle, now go and learn. That's the idea. Now I just need to know what that principle is. What's the main thing of the entire Torah? So he says the main thing of the entire Torah is don't do what's hateful to others. Don't do, what's hateful to yourself, don't do unto others. And that's v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. How that fits in with all of the other mitzvot. We talked about that there's mitzvot bein adam l'makom and bein adam l'chavero. So that fits with bein adam l'chavero. What's hateful to your fellow, don't do it to others. But what about mitzvot bein adam l'makom? What about the mitzvot that are you and God? Between you and God, what do you mean don't do what's hateful? So he says, that's the rest of what the pasuk says. He quoted him the entire pasuk according to the Kli Yakar. He didn't say v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, period. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ani H-Shem. So aside from the fact that you have to do what you have to do to make to have good relationships with other people, there's also a ani H-Shem aspect of Judaism and a ani H-Shem aspect of how we behave in the world. And that's what we do, and that's exactly what these two parts are so focused on, these relationships between us and other people, and our relationships between us and H-Shem. Thank you for listening. I'm going to stop the share to Facebook right now, and if you have any questions, this would be a good time to ask.